All right, well, maybe we'll go ahead and get started. So, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Victoria, and I'm Product Marketing Manager here at August Schools. We're really excited to have you join us for this conversation about how DEI leaders can use data to support their practice and tailor programming to best support their student communities. We understand that the school day is crazy, especially this last week before winter break. So if a student comes into your office and you have to drop, no worries. I'll be sending the recording out right after. Also, feel free to drop questions or thoughts in the chat throughout. Awesome. So today we're joined by two wonderful speakers, Mark Boswell, the Executive Director of Pipeline Cooperative, and Pete Russell, the CEO of August Schools. I'll pass it over to them to share a bit more about themselves and the work that they do.
Yeah, sure. I can start. I'm Pete. I'm the CEO here at August Schools. We've been developing products for student support professionals for about 4 years now at August Schools. That's across physical health, behavioral health, now learning specialists, and really kind of a natural extension into the landscape of equity and inclusion. Please, Mark.
Yeah, Mark Boswell, Executive Director of the Pipeline Cooperative. And our goal is to really, at Pipeline Cooperative, is to diversify the educational ecosystem, and our collaboration and our partnership with August Schools really, which I'm excited to talk about today a little bit about some of the bits and pieces of what we've been up to and some of the thoughts, but it really helps us meet our goals. So looking forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. So today we're going to be talking about data. And so I wanted to start off with chatting about, using data in schools is a relatively new concept. So how have you all, both of you in your own spaces, seen the use of data evolve specifically in that DEI space?
Yeah, I can give a little bit of context, kind of how we got into the space and what we've been seeing on the ground. I think we've been kind of pulled in this direction by our customers who found themselves with a lack of data in this space, or the information that they were finding maybe on their district or school's marketing website was not a complete reflection of their actual population, and even just getting basic demographic breakdowns about your own school can be surprisingly difficult. We were very shocked to hear that. So folks were using our counseling module to just understand, very, very basic questions about their own population. And over time, folks have been trying to kind of almost jerry-rig our other roles to be able to answer more and more questions about equity and inclusion initiatives. So what we've seen is a little bit of we're in a nascent state in schools, and I think that's true of both private schools and public schools, but an increasingly strong desire to become more data-driven and more data-informed. So I think a lot of folks have had kind of a gut feeling about kind of which way the wind is blowing in any given moment, especially through the tumultuous kind of last 5-10 years. But we see a lot of people really trying to put evidence and put really hard data behind some of these initiatives, especially kind of as the context switches and some of this program is facing more and more pressure. It's increasingly important to be able to kind of understand and defend your position using data. So that's all to say, we're currently, I think, in an immature state with a strong desire to mature quickly, and increasingly more and more tools that help schools become more kind of data first in areas that historically have kind of devoid of data. I'm curious to hear what you think, Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say what's interesting is when you said this idea of data first, I always remind people that educators are some of the best data scientists on the planet because they constantly are doing action research, right? So as a teacher in a classroom, you set a lesson and it bombed first period. But then the planning period, that 5-minute period, the teacher has taken all the data from first period and readjusted all of the things so that second and third and whenever else, hopefully not that class at the end of the day, but those periods go off way more swimmingly. So I think for me, when I think about data and education, specifically in the K-12 land, what's interesting is I find that a lot of educators in this space are a little nervous of the way that data is presented and how it is utilized, because it is somewhat of a foreign when you do the kind of kind of very deep research back data and the reporting. It's actually not speaking to educators a lot of times, even though it may be educational data. And there's an interesting bridge of how educators use data all the time. But what I what I'm hoping is that we can move towards not just having all that data up here in the head, but instead moving it to a place where we can actually utilize it across the board. Because collectively, I truly believe that a room full of educators, given time, could solve all the world ills. And so, what I appreciate about this idea of getting what's going on up here out into a space that we can all collectively utilize, I think will bridge that gap of being I wouldn't say anxious, but a little hesitant of using data and understanding how to utilize it and tell that data story, and getting to the point where um, we are making decisions throughout the day based on data because we know the importance of the effects of our space on our students, in our space. So I think data is always around in K-12 schools, especially, um, or even pre-K-12. And I think that there's a way in which we can utilize it and make it more accessible to the school itself to utilize and make decisions in that way. So, it's there. And I think now it's time to really think about how we put it in the space. Um, and I don't want to use the word capitalize, but utilize it in a way to make some decisions that will positively benefit the inclusion efforts in our schools. So,
Yeah, I think that's this letting perfect get in the way of the good is something we see a lot in K-12, where, to your point, Mark, like folks are kind of perennially waiting for these in-depth, institutionally backed research studies to come out to be able to understand something. Meanwhile, they've used their own heuristics, they've been cutting through these problems daily, hourly. So kind of on the ground, they're kind of using their own data set, to your point, in your head, rather than kind of creating something more structured across teams. And kind of we see a lot of data in different siloed systems, which are complicated problems, especially when you're talking about very sensitive issues where folks don't want data to kind of leave a place where they know they can protect it. I think the ultimate siloed data is I've got it all going on up here, and I'm going to walk across the hall to a known trusted person on another team and try to sort through an issue in a collaborative cross-functional way. Again and again, these very these informal mechanisms. And when you have a very talented person on the ground, that informal thing can work out excellently and you can drive change. And one person might be tracking it in their head. They might be tracking what's going on in a spreadsheet. They force of kind of personality can kind of get people behind them and drive leadership. And we see so many talented people in the inclusion space driving change, but doing it through kind of a lot of personal resources and a less systematic in a way that I think is probably necessary to create more lasting change.
Yeah, I mean, you're touching on something that I think about all the time about how quite often when we want a successful system or there is a successful system in an educational institution, a lot of times it's actually attached to a human and not to a system. And so that if that human leaves, then all of a sudden the system is missing, right? And I think about education quite often, like all of us do, as such a head and a heart. business, and when we're dealing with children and we're dealing with younger beings and trying to get them to where we want them to be, a lot of the times we default to the heart space. Like, how would this feel? How are those bits and pieces? Even though we are collecting kind of the data in the headspace to then know what to do next. And what I appreciate about our collaboration is the intentionality of, yeah, we hear your heart and we want to honor that, and we want to give you the data, the place to put the data so that it can back up why you're doing what you're doing. And so that reconnect of the two things is what I appreciate about this collaboration so much, is being able to really help think about how we can help educators and anybody really think through, okay, I have this data, what does it mean? And I have this feeling, but what is the data that backs up this feeling to then make the next choice? So that whole being attached to one person and those feelings, and developing a system that actually is there and is supportive of the institution is something that I've really appreciated about our partnership.
Yeah, that ties in actually really nicely into my next question. So much of, like you said, the head and the heart, so much of what DEI leaders focus on is very hard to quantify. How do you capture a sense of belonging using metrics? So I'd love to hear from both of you, why is this data so important for DEI leaders, and how exactly can it help them drive that meaningful change?
Yeah, I don't mind starting off. Supporting and raising humans and all those things are very complicated, right? It's not that there's a script that has been written out as the exact way to do such things, because everybody's a little different. And in order to best meet those needs of the individuals, we need levels of data to then direct our decisions, right? Anybody who's been in the classroom knows that you may teach the same grade every year, but you're not teaching the same class every year, right? And what I mean by that is the group of students that come in are a little bit different. And to be able to have a baseline to know, right, to collect data over time, to have a baseline to know how far on or off a group of students or an individual student is from a level of baseline, allows us as educators to do our job more efficiently, right? To make the adjustments a little quicker, right? To see the trends, that not just see the trends, we feel the trends, but then also just see the data story and say, oh, I'm not just crazy and feeling this thing. It's actually, here's the data that backs up in it. So I would say that to me is what I really am thinking about in this space, and how people can utilize this in order to improve inclusion and belonging in all these spaces, because there's plenty of brain science around the importance of belonging in spaces, and to be able to then show, here are the instances that push us closer to that, and here are the instances that pull us further away from that, and then make decisions accordingly, is a really powerful thing for anybody, but especially in education, as again, I don't want to belittle the fact that we are affecting the future lives of somebody's precious baby. Like, we gotta make sure that we're taking care of people's precious babies, right? And I think data allows us, and I'm going to say this, and Pete, hopefully you'll appreciate, good data, not bad data and bad data. Good data allows us to make these decisions in a way that we will feel more confident in what we are doing next and building upon that. So.
Yeah, and to build on that, I mean, like, some of the things you're asking about, Victoria, like, how do you quantify belonging? And it's a hard question. That said, like, to the theme of not letting the perfect get in the way of the good, you start by asking, and you put a numerical scale against it, and you're getting somewhere. And it's not perfect. It's not describing all the contours and nuances of human experience and that ebb and flow. And this is what's amazing about certain kind of pulse checks. And the more frequently you're asking these questions, the more you're capturing the fact that I felt different. I felt different before lunch than after lunch, based on the fact that I got invited to sit at this table, and that really meant something. But that doesn't mean that we just give up. We just need to make sure that we're asking the same questions in a structured way, in a repeatable way, using kind of best practices for establishing norms, benchmarks, and being able to kind of track the story over time. So in terms of kind of establishing a benchmark to say, how are students from different backgrounds feeling included on my campus? How's that changing over time? How's that changing as a result of kind of different important events on the campus? What's making people feel kind of closer, and what's making people feel further away from the mission of my institution? Really just getting in front of people, starting to ask those questions, and then importantly, not just having a direct interface with the student. I think it's really important to arm the people on the ground, having these nuanced conversations with young people and giving them the ability to kind of capture and synthesize some of these interactions they have with students in a way that you're establishing this track record and starting to pin some data points to these very kind of nuanced, complex relationships that evolve over time.
Yeah, and Pete, to add to that, collecting data, they're kind of, the human experience, like a student does this to another student, or student supports the student this way. But as we start collecting data, we might actually find that it's not just the people, it might be the space, right? It may be the design of this place actually causes people not to be able to connect in the ways in which they want to, right? It starts asking us the questions of why, right? And then we have the data to back up why we're doing something. And so the reason why the garden is built in this manner is because the pathways create da-da-da-da-da, right? And that comes from collecting data on how does this feel, what is going on, what are the opportunities that you have in order to connect. So it actually, one of my favorite aspects of this is what we're doing is increasing student voice in a way, right? And we're collecting the data from the students about their experiences and these sorts of things, and then making decisions, right? Can make decisions to support them in their growth and learning, because, again, we know the research behind feeling that sense of belonging and the ability to actually perform academically, and how closely those two things are tied. So we want to make sure that while we're collecting this data, it's actually supporting students doing their best, right? And feeling their best. So I love the aspect that it asks us questions outside of just human interaction one-to-one, but also the space, the schedule, all of these bits and pieces come together to create this sense of belonging or feeling included in these sorts of things. So I think it's been a long time coming that we need a consistent space. And again, I appreciate what you said earlier about, is this perfect yet? No, it's building, it's iterative, it's learning and growing in a living, breathing thing that we all need to think about as collecting data, not as a static thing, but more something that we're going to continue to build on and grow.
Awesome. Yeah. And so now I'd love to talk a little bit about, how we do all of this in practice. So I'd love to hear any examples you all have of how you've seen schools use DEI related data in a really thoughtful way.
Yeah, I mean, I can start talking about how people have used some of our products, particularly in the counseling, student support domains. We actually have some kind of interesting stuff off the shelf that were baked into those products really early on, where you could, as a counselor, as a counseling leader, as an administrator, you can look at the different types of visits you've had over the school year, broken down by different demographics. And then you can even normalize and say, okay, if we had an equal number of these different of students of these different backgrounds or groups, are we kind of systematically avoiding certain groups? Are we pathologizing certain groups by meeting them in a very outsized way? So folks were very quickly, when they started kind of creating a documentation practice as a counselor, starting to really want to understand their practice through a lens that to help them understand equity inclusion on their campus, and whether their practice was maybe exacerbating issues or was kind of helping. Because we work in the student support software space, we're privy to some other players that are doing a lot of really interesting stuff here. Some of the kind of universal screeners kind of help you understand the kind of baseline sense of belonging when students first come onto campus. Student surveys, I think, are a really positive thing that many school districts are using, and increasingly more independent schools are starting to use to understand. We can talk about kind of where that data is positive and how it tends to kind of trail off with a typical setup of I ask a bunch of questions in the beginning of the year and then again the following year without a lot of information in between. That said, folks who are doing pulse surveys kind of throughout the year, and there are a lot of forward-thinking people doing that. And I think generally, generally, like to the point where we were talking about earlier about this being person-based, like I have had interactions with folks who are doing pretty elaborate data analysis. They're not data analysts, and they're pulling data from multiple different sources. They're cobbling it together using a unique identifier. They're creating visualizations to help people understand what the data means for stakeholders within administration or even on a board. And this is often folks who they might be a teacher, they might be a dean, and then they're also playing the role of DEI director, DEI coordinator, and then they're also playing the role of data analyst on top of it. It's really remarkable and impressive what folks have managed to cobble together. But again, I think some of the great things we see people doing are just asking the students directly in the form of surveys at minimum once a year, hopefully more than that throughout the year, and increasingly folks kind of documenting their interactions with students, especially as they relate to different DEI and belonging issues, and capturing that in systems that until now have been kind of meant for other folks. And I think the DEI coordinators have often had to kind of get data from other groups and pull it together and need to navigate the permission to have access to that information and all of the kind of informal and formal bureaucratic measures just to be able to put together a picture of how are things going for our students of different backgrounds. So I'll just say a lot of heroics, some really sophisticated stuff that is really grassroots and impressive.
I mean, you all heard it here first. Pete just called all teachers heroes. I'm just going to say that out loud. And he's not wrong. And to add to what you're saying, Pete, what I'm thinking about is the level at which data can zoom in and zoom out, right? So, for example, in a classroom, an exit ticket at the end of class is collecting data. How was class today? Or what do you remember about that? You collect it at the end, you look at it, you have a better understanding of what you might need to go and support or reteach tomorrow, or how well your lesson went, right? That's on that level. And then the ability to be able to zoom up 30,000 feet and see across the board, okay, actually, and I'm just going to continue on this exit ticket analogy, is now you see all of the exit tickets across the board and go, oh, actually, there's a larger trend here, not just in this kind of one micro space. It seems as if every second period class, whatever the thing is, right? And so I say that because how data is being used in spaces for DEI is in so many different ways across the board on an individual level and at a higher up level that like an example may be meeting with a group, affinity groups, asking how they're going. A lot of these other aspects of school that are sometimes outside of the classroom, sometimes inside. I mean, even things like disciplinary issues and things like that. Understanding what the data we are collecting is telling us completely. I say to teachers all the time, not just teachers, excuse me, educators all the time, everything we do is a communication, right? And if we don't know what we're communicating, that's a pretty dangerous thing because we're not understanding the outcome that we're getting, right? So the idea is, what are some ways, or what are the ways in which we're collecting data that then we can all utilize it to make some decisions moving forward? So again, some of the ways in which I've been seeing in a lot of spaces, and on the micro level, classes, even discussions that teachers and advisors may have with their groups, that's a form of data, right? But where does it live? Where does it go so that we can utilize that across the board to have a better view of what's going on in the culture of our spaces? So there are plenty of different ways. So Victoria, I'm kind of answering your question, kind of not, partially because the ways in which I'm seeing data used is all over the place in a great way. That means, to Pete's point, the heroes are trying. The heroes are going, something's not right. I got to figure what it is, figure out what it is. I got to do something. Like, it's not okay. Again, these are other people's precious babies. So educators, those heroes, are trying to figure out what is the best way to support and take care of these students. So I could make a long list, Victoria, of all the different ways. Or I could just say there's a lot of different ways, and the goal is to find a way that's at least somewhat standardized across so that we can utilize that data in a centralized space to then make some decisions collectively moving forward.
Awesome. Yeah, well, definitely lots of different ways. I feel like that's the main theme we've heard today. So, sort of leads us into our next, I'd love to hear a little bit more. You two have been collaborating on a new project to build a documentation platform for DEI leaders within August schools. So could you share a little bit more about how this idea came to be and what exactly you all have been working on?
Yeah, so again, we've gotten pulled in this direction. I a little bit feel like we're awfully late, based on how many people have brought this up as an ask, and so for us, it started with folks using the behavioral health, counseling, social worker roles to be able to kind of answer questions about their practice and how it's fostering or driving their DEIJ initiatives. So, and also I shouldn't be leaving behind the physical health part is actually massive here too. And in our system, you can see this really interesting stuff about chronic conditions and incidents of different kinds of illness, broken down by different groups. And like, if you're not healthy, you're not learning. If you're not feeling a sense of belonging, you're not learning. So all these things are deeply intertwined. And, we've set out to build this platform that focuses on a lot of the folks at school whose primary responsibility or secondary responsibility is kind of non-instructional. So teachers have never been the kind of core focus of our products. We're focusing on all the different folks in the school village who are helping to support students. And like part of, we have a student support team role. As an example, sometimes there's a counselor, there's an administrator, sometimes the nurse is part of that group even, depending on what kinds of issues a given student faces. Became a little bit obvious in a kind of a bad omission to not have a formal role and a formal documentation space for the folks leading the DEI initiatives. The way the roles in the platform work is they stack on top of each other. So I can be a counselor as well as a DEI coordinator at my school and in August schools. I can be part of the student support team for some students, and I can be the DEI director for my entire school. And really kind of making sure that role kind of gets the right treatment and the appropriate treatment, I think is a little bit overdue. So whenever we launch a new role, I will say it's not a small undertaking to launch these. There's a lot of software, there's technical considerations, and there's also really making sure that what you roll out is best in class, is kind of undergirded by the research-based best practices in the community. So we find experts like Mark who help us kind of identify institutions that are leading research in the different kinds of areas that we then support, who can also help us meet other experts, and where there isn't a golden standard or something that everyone agrees on, which in these kinds of spaces there often isn't, really helping kind of facilitate a conversation among, this manifests as an advisory board, facilitating a conversation about, hey, what should we be tracking here? Everyone has their different format for this thing. Can we agree on one? And sure, we can change it at the margins, but doing our best to come to the table with something that most DEI directors are going to look at and say, yeah, this makes sense. These are the kinds of things I'm trying to keep track of right now. And, you know, we're getting started in January with a release that includes, I'll be really transparent here, kind of the basics. So a lot of folks are keeping track of things like bias incidents in very different ways. We have not had a single conversation with someone who has said, we want to bury bias incidents. We want to kind of move on from them and pretend they never happened. People want to know how many happened last year, of what type, and do we have kind of a standard protocol and procedure for how we deal with these things? Can we define that, and can we look back year over year and say how many of these events happened? What did we learn from it as a community? Are less happening over time? Is there something going on in the world that's making more happen, or something within our community? Exit interview templates was a really important thing that Mark brought to the table, and it was very surprising for us to find out that despite a lot of independent schools in particular being extremely concerned about how many students of color are leaving before graduation, there's not a robust, standardized exit interview that every student participates in, when they can give. That's such an amazing moment to get helpful information as a school, but that is kind of being lost. Making sure there are restorative justice templates, making sure that there are inclusion accessibility planning templates for, if you're, say, designing a space, what should you be thinking about to make sure that when the long tail of when people who you might not have ever met before, a person of a type you've never met before, they're going to walk into that space and they're going to feel like they belong there. What should you be thinking about, and as you design that space? So these are the kinds of things where we do our best to come up with a standard, kind of a null hypothesis, working with experts, and then we put it into institutions' hands. And when this first rolls out, it'll be new. There'll be little problems with it here and there. But the most interesting part, in my opinion, of our work is when we deploy into a school, a new role at a new school, and facilitate this amazing conversation and exchange of ideas among the practitioners to say, geez, what should we keep track of here? And what is the right way of describing that? And what is the right checklist that we should run through as we design spaces and curriculum, and just kind of forcing people to come together, because we put it on a piece of software and it exists, and it is not just this rattling around in people's heads where they kind of have their own distinctions and differences that they're harboring, and they're kind of like, oh, we're on the same page roughly. Like, we create this page where you really need to agree as an institution how you're handling some of these problems. And I mean, the software is helpful and all of that, but I really do think that just kind of taking that plunge and having that conversation is one of the biggest benefits. So it's like, there's the system, but there's the active systemization that needs to happen within an institution as they adopt the system. And that's always really fascinating to participate in. I got rolling there, Mark. I want to make sure you
I was along for the ride. I was like, hey, and you got some leeway because you called all teachers heroes. So I was like, let him cook. Yeah, just quickly, because, and by the way, thanks everybody for staying over. We're a little over, but this conversation's great. Um, the idea, what was kind of the early beginnings, people was like, hey, Mark, tell me about the DEI director role at a school. And those of you that are still here and those of you that watch this later are probably chuckling because you know that there's not one version. There are an infinite amount of versions. There's somebody who's got a 0.2% of their FTE and that's part of their thing. There's somebody who's a pair of teachers or a couple teacher or a couple administrators. There's the person who works with the board directly and doesn't really work with the educators, right? There are so many different versions. And so what was interesting is trying to develop a tool that would meet the needs of all of those, all of the different versions of the role, right? The idea that you know the the need actually isn't for us to build the exact perfect tool right away. It's actually to start collecting all the different versions and putting them in a space so that we can then make some decisions moving forward collectively, so that there is some standardization in the ways in which we collect and report data, right? And again, I think that to me, we're talking about the role and what type of things people are looking for. The best part about this is the beginning and there's more to come, right? We've had a lot of really interesting conversations about what version 1.5 and 2.0 look like and those sorts of things. And I would say we can't wait to have it out and about and have people actually give some feedback, like an exit ticket or like the exit interviews and those sorts of things. And hopefully they're not exit interviews; they're actually just interviews. But the whole point of us getting the feedback and really building something that is beneficial to anybody who's an educator who cares about belonging and inclusion, which is every educator. So
Amazing. Yeah, I'm so excited for everyone to get to see coming soon the new DEI role in the Aga Schools platform. And so I know we're already so over, but I want to make sure we answer some questions. So Brittany had a great question about this idea that like often, we collect a lot of data, we review it, but then what's that next step? Like, how do you not forget about it? What are those sort of really specific ways that you can focus on that data, focus it down, and get really specific about how to analyze it and take those insights and take them into action. So,
yeah, and that's why we're talking about things in terms of like a response protocol and things like that, and like our system is you have documentation, so you're taking notes of things that have happened in the past, but you're kind of doing that in a form, and the form's kind of creating a little bit of a prompt or kind of a little bit of a guardrail about, okay, as I'm taking note of this thing that happened, how should I be thinking about it? And we're also trying to unpack, okay, and what's next. So as part of the bias incident report, as an example, there's not just kind of, okay, what happened? There's also a template to say, okay, as you kind of think about the next steps, are you using the best practices of restorative justice as an example as you respond? And like our encounter system allows you to keep track of kind of multiple interventions. So I think what you'll see as this kind of comes to life in schools is these turn into kind of rich stories, and there's stories about things that happened and then what people did about it, and then you kind of have this book you can look back on and say, okay, how have we changed? What were we like back then, and what did we do? What did we think we should do then? And based on that, how can we improve it looking forward? So we're certainly like, it's this unique thing. We operate in all these spaces where we're not the expert. Our customers are the experts, but with systems, we help people be more systematic about their own approach and kind of get in sync with one another about what to do next based on what just happened.
Yeah, the first thing that made me think about Brittany's question, great question, thank you, Brittany, is again, there's more there. To me, I went micro first. Okay, is this what's going on with one student? And we're talking about, how did we handle this one? It could be a major instance or major incident, positive or negative, right? But how did we handle this one micro, right? And then zooming out to the macro. And like I said earlier, one of the reasons why I really love this collaboration is because from the second that we started working together, I realized that for August Schools, data is a living, breathing thing. It's not a static, oh, you do this and you're done. It is, okay, what next now? You have this data. What do you need to do next in order to um, plan out your next steps, right? And think through, okay, we have this data, even if it's for an individual student, okay, the advisor is going to talk to so-and-so, and then they fill in the gaps, right? And to Pete's point, you kind of get this running story, and the visualization of the data allows for educators to really quickly see some trends within the data, which I appreciated. I've been saying appreciate a lot today, but I really do appreciate it, Pete. But the idea that I can quickly look and see some trends and then dig deeper. And I think the best data that comes in is the data that keeps forcing you to ask why, or like, what is this, or what's next, or what's going on. If the data comes in and it just resolves the issue, well, then, okay, now you're on to the next thing. But I think from what I've seen, we have a lot of data that comes in. And then the next step, to your point, Brittany, is like what we're missing. And I think the way that it's built out, kind of stepwise, is forcing you to say, okay, you've now seen it and you can't unsee it. What are you going to do next, right? And then start making the plans moving forward. So yeah, I think that's the way that we are really thinking about building. And one of the reasons why it was so important to start small first, right? Instead of unleashing this whole big thing, start small to really get, again, that good data in so that you can then utilize it for a next step, right? And then build upon from there. So that's what when I first heard the question, I was like, oh, there's the like micro incident, which could be macro, by the way, and the like total trend for the whole institution. So yeah, I think that's where this is going to force, I wouldn't say force, but gently guide forcefully into action.
I love that. You can't unsee it. That's so key. Like not met like we solve the problems we measure, right? And like it doesn't make a problem go away if you're not keeping track of it. It just makes it faster.
Yeah, one thing, Brittany, your comment reminded me of is one of my favorite things about the August School platform is that the data, it doesn't look like an Excel sheet. It's like presented in these very fun, colorful graphs that make it really easy to get the insights out of the data. And so what I love about that is that instead of it being sort of a once a semester, you look at a million Excel sheets, it's sort of it becomes an everyday thing. You know, you're getting real-time data. So if you see, oh, look, this month, for whatever reason, we had a dip in the number of boys that came to visit the office. You can say like, okay, how are we being more proactive about making sure that we're getting more boys into the office, that they feel comfortable coming to us? And so I just think it's so cool that it becomes sort of ingrained into the culture and the daily practice. It's not this sort of, once a year, we're going to do a massive review of the data. So yeah, to add that. And I know I saw a couple more questions. Clinton was asking to see some examples of the product. So it's not quite ready yet, but Pete mentioned some great examples of the types of things in their product, but we'll reach out to you after so we can set up some time to show you more. And then Cliff had a question. He said, given the anti-DEI legislation occurring in the US, do you believe there may be some pushback on seeking out DEI data in some schools or districts?
Yes.
Sure. Not.
I mean, Leslie, it's not, I'm just going to be really kidding. It's not like we're not used to that. Like it's already happening and has happened. What I will say, and I say to people quite frequently, is the only way that we will be able to meet that is by utilizing solid data and data practices to say, actually, here are the things that are happening and here are the outcomes, right? And so, yes, while there may be, and there will be, I'm sure, some pushback, I think in the idea of, not in the idea of, in making sure that we are doing best by our students and allowing them to thrive and allowing them in creating the conditions for them to thrive, right? A lot of what this data is letting us know where are the areas that they're not thriving, where are the areas that are forcing them to behave in certain ways or ask questions of them so they can't be fully present in a spot, right? And so while this may, I mean, you can label it DEI, you can label it whatever you would like to a certain extent. Um, as an educator, I care about doing what's best and what's right for students. And then anybody who wants to come after me for that, come at me, right? But this is, I think, the next wave and the next way to have the conversation in a way that actually increases the dialogue back and forth, where it's not just coming from the heart and the feelings, but it's actually coming from the head as well. It's saying, hey, we're not just feeling this. Here's the data from over the past couple of years, and here are the benefits and the areas that we've had to adjust across. So to answer your question, yes, and come after me. Like I'm here. It's not about me. It's about these students and these kids and doing the best for them. And if this is where we got to stand to make sure that we can improve education in those ways, then that's what we're here for.
Love it. Any other questions? That was a good note to end on. Awesome.
Again,
Well,
thanks so much for coming on your lunch hour and talking and listening to us talk about what we think is a really important topic. And I think the last question kind of summed up the cultural context we're in right now. So I think more important than ever. So thanks so much for coming today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and those of you on the West Coast, happy brunch. I'm glad you came during your brunch hour. And we really appreciate y'all stopping by, and would love to talk to you more about all of the things, and maybe share some brunch or lunch at some point. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any other questions, and have a wonderful winter break. We hope it's restful and rejuvenating. Bye, everyone.
See ya.